Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of GQ Heroes. Right now, we're kickstarting the day with the mind and mental health. As part of my job, I know that 91 million people have searched for the term meditation on Google and counting. It's an ever-growing industry, yet we have barely scratched the surface when it comes to understanding mental health and how it affects us on a day-to-day basis, along with how it affects the different areas of our lives. Today, our host of excellent speakers will guide you through their experiences when it comes to well-being. So coming up, we have the incredible Olympian Victoria Pendleton and the record-breaking Ross Edgley discussing mental strength in sports, followed by supermodel and activist Adwara Boa in conversation with founder of SBTV, Jamal Edwards. But first onto the stage, will you please give a warm welcome to author Shireen Giller in conversation with co-founder of Headspace, Andy Puddicombe.
Andy is really the living proof that technology can be a force for good in the world. And Headspace has now been clinically proven to reduce stress by a third, 14% more focus. There are many other stats. And 45 million people have downloaded Headspace, half of them men. And they've been downloading Andy, who is the voice of Headspace, but also really crucially, the authentic heart of Headspace. Andy records those meditations from a minute studio in the dark off Venice Beach. And he is authentically present when he does the recordings, with only Scott, his sound recorders beside him. So it is a really authentic experience. But I just wanted to go back a bit because, Andy, it might never have happened. You were set to graduate in sports science. You might have become a sports trainer if a really tragic event happened in your life when a drunk driver ploughed into a gang of your friends on Christmas Eve and really set you off on a 10-year-long monastic journey through the East. Can you tell us a bit about what that was like?
Sure. Morning, everybody, by the way. So I think I was lucky. I got introduced to meditation when I was about 10 or 11 years old. So it was around anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was involved in this accident where a drunk driver crashed into a group of us, and I was very lucky. I was one of the ones that wasn't hit, but several people died, and pretty much everyone ended up in intensive care. I think it's really hard to know how to deal with that kind of thing, and I think everyone deals with it in their own way. And probably like a lot of people, I tried to outrun it for a little while, so I thought if I maybe traveled the world, I could. But I found that every country I went to, like, there I was again, and my mind had followed me. And I tried drinking as well, and that worked and then you wake up the next day and thoughts are still there. And so I was probably 22 when I made the decision to go and be a monk. And it's funny, at the time, I was studying sports science, I was working as a personal trainer, I was competing as a gymnast. So I had, in some ways, from the outside, you could say I was very healthy, and yet inside, my mind was going crazy. And I think there is just the world in which we live. There's a temptation to focus very much on the exterior and not so much on what's going on inside. And for me, the only way, the head of science at the time, I went to see him and I said, okay, I've made the decision. I'm going to quit my degree and I'm going to be a Buddhist monk. Can you imagine at a sports college? I mean, he thought I was mad. And he actually said, you know what you need? You said you need to go and get some Prozac from your doctor. And the idea was, it was kind of interesting that we would necessarily find the fulfillment we're looking for in a bottle of medication. There are times when that stuff is necessary, but for me personally at that time, I was after something a little different.
And what was it like being a monk? Everyone wants to know.
Yeah, so if you've ever had that thought, I don't know if you've ever had that thought, look, it's an incredible experience. I wouldn't change it for the world. It's I went there with a little bit of a naive sort of enlightenment or bust kind of attitude. It's a very sort of Western attitude to head to the monastery. And I think at first it's amazing because it's like coming to a place like this, you know, it's so quiet and peaceful, and it's kind of, and you have a sort of a honeymoon phase of a few weeks maybe. And then you realize, oh wow, this is it. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. There's no one to go and speak to. And you're just sitting with oneself all day, every day. And then it gets a bit more challenging, and it gets to a point where really the only thing you can do is to get comfortable with your own thoughts as they are. And that sounds kind of challenging, but it's actually very liberating, because if you can be at ease with the mind as it is, then you're no longer searching for a quiet mind. You know, it doesn't matter if the mind's noisy, if it's quiet, if the thoughts are pleasant, if they're unpleasant. You're okay with the mind as it is. And I think in life, that's an incredibly valuable skill to have.
Your very particular brand, for want of a better word, of mindfulness is very playful, very accessible, very relaxed. I know you've been very inspired by Lama Eshe, who was the abbot at the last monastery you went to, Samueling, in southwest Scotland. I wonder whether you could talk a bit about how you were drawn to him and how you came to find this sort of access to mindfulness.
Yeah, so for those of you not necessarily intimately familiar with the different traditions of Buddhism, there's lots of different ones. I trained in the Burmese school first, which was for about 5 years. It's very, very serious. In all the time there, I think I saw anyone like laugh the whole time I was there. I mean, it's quite, you know, it's just very austere. And then about 5 years in, I was introduced to a Tibetan Lama called Lama Eshe. He started a monastery in Scotland about 50 years ago when they escaped from Tibet. And he had just a very different attitude. He had an openness, a warmth, a playfulness. There was a lot of laughter in the monastery. And there was just a very different kind of atmosphere. And for me, that was something that I resonate with, I could connect to. And all of a sudden, it wasn't this very, very serious thing. It was something you could have some fun with and laugh at oneself, with oneself. And he just had this idea as well, not in an evangelical way, but just that meditation could be something bigger. And he would always say to us, even as monks, kind of think big, you know. And that was something that I definitely carried into Headspace.
Well, it certainly is big. Headspace, though, happened almost by coincidence, didn't it? I mean, if you hadn't taught your co-founder, Rich Pearson, who, for those who don't know, was suffering from burnout, had been a BBH exec. That sort of collision of two courses together.
No, Rich is very much, he's the brains behind Headspace. So we met probably about 10 years ago. He was burnt out. I think classic agency lifestyle, working really, really hard. And one of our mutual friends introduced us and said, this guy really needs some help. And I said, well, that would be great, because I'd quite like to know kind of what to do with the clinic and how to make that a bit bigger. So we started doing an exchange, and we got on incredibly well. And the very first time I met Rich, he said, you know what we should do? And this is 10 years ago. This is like 9-10 months after the App Store had opened, I think. He said we should do the Nike Plus of meditation. And I told him it was a ridiculous idea. A meditation app would never work. I stand by my decision. And, you know, it's interesting. For 3 years, Rich just very patiently sat back as we did events, we did books, until eventually the app was born in 2012.
And now, very sadly, you know, Thrive, the US conference, has described a burnout epidemic. You know, 500,000 Brits a year suffer from work-related stress. Can you describe exactly how mindfulness reduces stress?
So look, I think the most important thing for me isn't for any scientist or for any teacher or anyone to say kind of why somebody should do mindfulness. It's for each individual to find out how it's relevant to them. So we do know from science that it can help to reduce stress, that it helps to reduce anxiety, that it helps to reduce depression, that it helps to reduce aggression, and that it helps to improve compassion, that it helps to improve focus, and it helps to improve productivity. So we know those things. We also know that it kind of helps people sleep a little bit better. We also know that it helps people in their relationships. So for me, it's always kind of, it's not like you should do this because it's good for you.
Yeah.
Or here's how it fits into your personal life, or here's how it fits into your work life. It's like, okay, here are the many different benefits. Which one feels most relevant? And if there were a tool that you could use for that in your life, and it only took maybe 5 or 10 minutes a day, is that worth exploring?
Yeah. And actually, how does it actually do it? I mean, for people who haven't maybe meditated in the room,
Yeah.
why is it that people are more relaxed and less stressed after a regular mindfulness practice?
So there are some psychological reasons and there are some physiological reasons, but essentially if you think about sort of the stress response which happens to us when we get very anxious or upset, there's a reverse of that as well. There's the relaxation response. So as the mind begins to calm down, our breathing tends to slow, our heart rate drops, the amount of cortisol and adrenaline pumping around the body, that all decreases. And it creates a virtuous circle where the mind increasingly gets calmer, the body lets go of more and more tension, and we start to experience perhaps a relaxation that, when I speak to people, a lot of people just don't have this in any part of their life, ever. So I think even, although 5 or 10 minutes may sound like a very small amount of the day, actually, within the context of a very busy day, that can feel huge.
And as I think Anna alluded to it earlier, mindfulness is all over Google. There are 15 million Google references to mindfulness. It's used as an adjective by so many people. I'm sure lots of people in the room are wondering, what is the exact definition of mindfulness? What would you say?
Well, I think it's often misrepresented. I think it's often used interchangeably with meditation as well, which is confusing. The one thing I'd say to anyone who's sort of thought about it is that this isn't something you need to get or acquire. This is something that you already have. You've probably already experienced it many, many times in your life, whether it's watching a sunset one day, watching your children play, or just having a relaxing afternoon sometime. Those moments where thoughts seem to, disappear. There's a sense of ease, sense of calm, maybe a little less distraction than normal. So really being present with an open mind is the way that I was taught and the way I understand it. It's just that's really difficult to do, and when it happens, it never normally lasts as long as we'd like it to. And so meditation is just a way to practice being mindful. So it's just creating an environment in which we can be more mindful, and when we do that, we can then carry that back into our everyday life.
And it's so interesting, half the downloads of Headspace are men.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I mean, I could say why shouldn't it be like that? I mean, I think, so there is an idea, right, in the past that traditionally women have gravitated more towards meditation and yoga and these things. Right from the off, it has always been half and half on the platform. And when we do lots of focus groups and things, we started asking, so the response we got from men was that, okay, typically they didn't have the social circles that their female friends did, and that they didn't necessarily want to go to their boss or anyone at work and disclose the fact that they were necessarily struggling with stress or anxiety. They didn't necessarily want to go and see their doctor or a therapist. And the fact that they could, I'm not suggesting this is a replacement for that, but the fact that they could have something on their phone that they could use in private, that they didn't need to share with anybody else, that was a really empowering thing. So we suspect that that's part of it, but I also just think there's a broader cultural movement now. And I would say more in the UK here than we see back in the US, where sort of in terms of mental health and people being willing to just talk openly and say, actually, I'm having a hard time and that's okay. I feel like that's empowering more men to look at something like this.
I mean, one of the ways you probably really appeal to men is that you do see mindfulness in a very broad, physical and almost athletic way. I'm just going to quote something Andy had said and then ask him to say a bit more about it, because it's a great few lines. We are living in a world that is dependent on how we feel and our perception of life. When we're physically unfit, we're more dependent on others. When we're struggling with our minds, it impacts our relationships. It's the starting point for looking after our body and mind. Can you say a bit more about that? Why do you see it as a very, in a way, a very physical?
Yeah. So I think there's a few aspects. So the first bit there, the reason it's a starting point. So if you think about anything that we do in life, anything that we're passionate about, any of the life choices that we would like to make, they begin with the mind. So people often sort of, whether we're talking about nutrition, well, the pizza, the donut, it doesn't jump up off the plate and put itself in the, like, we make a decision to do that. On any given day when we wake up in the morning, we think, shall we go for a run? Should we not go for a run? Well, we can listen to the thought that says, I don't feel like going today, or we can see the thought, let it go, and actually then go for a run anyway. So I feel like if we want to make some healthy decisions about our physical health, that begins with the mind. But then there's also kind of how the mind plays into, I know there's going to be a session on sport kind of after this. Obviously, so we work with Nike, we work with the NBA, and a whole bunch of Olympic federations and athletes. And it's really about how do you bring that quality of ease, of flow into our physicality, into our body and into our life. So I feel like it's a range, it's a broad range, but we need to nurture the mind in the same way that we nurture the body. Yeah.
And is this at the heart of how you see strength and resilience?
It is, I think there is a very Western view of strength as being kind of, willpower and we work a lot with athletes on this. If you go into life, if you go into any kind of performance with I'm only going to think, good thoughts, I'm only going to think positive thoughts, that's actually a very fragile scenario, because what happens if a negative thought arises in the mind? What happens if you're unable to continue to think positive thoughts? It's way more strong, way more resilient if you can have a vulnerability which allows any and every thought into the mind. Positive thought? Okay, it's positive thought. Negative thought? Okay, it's negative thought. You don't buy into the thinking. Instead, kind of be comfortable resting in uncertainty, in that vulnerability. For me, that's real resilience. So not being free from fear, not being free from anxiety, that's part of being a human being, but understanding it, being comfortable with it, making friends with it, and then you're able to kind of work with it in a more positive way. Yeah.
And so really leading on from that is one of the striking things about you is you have a lot of self-discipline, clearly having been a monk for 10 years.
A little.
But, you also rigorously set up good habits, Andy gets up at dawn, works out for an hour, meditates every day of his life for an hour, eats well, drinks well, has a pretty empty inbox, uses the sleep app Whoop. I mean, I could go on. Do you think that mindfulness naturally leads to good habits?
I think it does, and you don't paint me as too much of an angel. I mean, it's definitely not a very rock and roll lifestyle.
Yeah.
But I live in LA and I have young children, and it's definitely quite a healthy lifestyle. I think mindfulness, as I say, it definitely helps us lead a more. It allows us to make choices. I think ordinarily we feel like we don't have choice. We feel like life is just, we're being swept away by life. We're caught up in our thinking, and because our thinking's always been a certain way, maybe we feel like we have to be that way. I feel what mindfulness has done for me is shown me a space in which I can make a choice. So I can choose. Do I want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning or at 7 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah.
Do I want to eat this one or this one? And do I want to go for an exercise? So it's not that it's happened naturally, it's just created the opportunity for choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The future for Headspace at the moment is quite amazing. They're developing a clinically validated, FDA-approved meditation prescriptive app that you could download to treat stress-related chronic diseases. And I hasten to add, there's a science team in Headspace working on this with Dr. Megan Jones. This could be incredible, couldn't it, when we've got the US spending $325 billion a year on retail prescription drugs.
Yeah. I mean, there's a joke for any of you that have been to LA. They say, you can hear people rattle as they walk down the street. I mean, the amount of medication that's taken is phenomenal. By 2030, so the healthcare costs of mental illness will outstrip heart disease, cancer, and diabetes combined. You can't scale the number of doctors, nurses, and therapists necessary to cope with that.
Yeah.
So there has to be digital intervention, you know. So yeah, we set up Headspace Health. Our intention is to create. There'll be sort of boxed off separate apps that are FDA approved and that can be prescribed by the doctor and then paid for by the health insurer. So we're about halfway through that process right now. It's a long process. We have about 20 published papers now, about 65 in the pipeline. And for us, I think knowing that it's ensuring that it is evidence-backed and ensuring they're specific to what we are serving up is really important. I think it gives people confidence, it gives people credibility, and it allows us to hopefully reach that many more people in the world. So.
Well, we are so lucky to have Andy here, live, present. So he is going to lead us in a 6-minute meditation, very specific.
It's very, I didn't come up with a 6-minute number. I don't know what that is.
This is not Andy, but we're going for 6 minutes.
Yeah. So has everybody done some? Has anybody done anything? Meditation, mindfulness? Like that in itself is just a massive shift. Like 10 years ago, there's no way that anybody in here would put a hand up. So yeah, we'll just do a short exercise. 3 really quick things. 1, if you haven't done this before, or even if you have done it before, don't think that just because you're going to close your eyes and do something called meditation that thoughts are going to stop. They won't. Your mind will continue to think, and if you try to stop your mind from thinking, you'll get really frustrated. So just allow the thoughts to come and go, and I'll guide you through it. Second one, no amount of effort can create relaxation in the mind. If you think about sleep, when you try to go to sleep, actually you move further away from sleep. In the same way, if you try too hard to meditate, whatever that is, then, it tends to feel a little bit stressful. And finally, as much as possible, try to let go of any ideas of meditation or mindfulness that you might have had previously, and just allow yourself to focus on the breath. So I'd like you to start, rather than closing your eyes straight away, just get comfortable. I'd suggest arms and legs uncrossed, but whatever's more comfortable for you. You can just rest your hands on your legs. And if you can start with your eyes open and just looking directly ahead of wherever you're sat right now. So you're not staring at one thing. It's a very soft focus. You should be able to see the people either side of you, the room around you. You might even be able to see the ceiling, the floor. And then just resting the gaze in that way. Just take a couple of big, deep breaths, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. So as you breathe in, just noticing how the body, the chest expands as the lungs fill with air, and as you breathe out, just allowing the body to sink into the seat beneath you. And with the next out breath, just gently closing the eyes. So in closing the eyes, just take a few seconds just to enjoy that feeling of having nothing to do, nowhere to go. Just feeling the contact, the weight of the body pressing down. And as you sit there, just taking a moment as well to notice any sounds around you. And just checking in with the body. So notice how you feel this morning, how the body feels, whether there's a sense of heaviness or lightness in the body. Maybe a sense of restlessness or stillness. And just beginning to notice how the body is breathing. So I don't want you to breathe in any special way, just allowing the body to breathe. And noticing where you feel that movement, that rising and falling sensation. So for some people, it's in the chest, might be in the diaphragm, the stomach. If you can't feel anything, just gently place your hand on your stomach so you feel that rising and falling movement. And we're just going to stay with that feeling, that movement of breath. Again, remember, natural for the mind to wander. If at any stage the mind wanders off, just realizing it, letting the thoughts go, and gently coming back to the breath again. So again, the moment you realize the mind's wandered off, just gently coming back to the breath again. And then slowly bringing the attention back once again to the body. Just coming back to that feeling of weight. Body against the seat and the feet on the floor. And then when you're ready, you can just gently open the eyes again. Okay.
Thank you, Andy.
Pleasure. I thought we should, we finished a minute early, but I envisaged them kind of coming on stage in the middle of the meditation, say, okay, that's enough, that's enough, off you go now. So I thought it was better to do it that way around.
So we have a minute left, but I just want to use that to thank Andy.
It's a pleasure.
For that beautiful meditation which has set us all up for our mind morning.
Yeah, nice.
And for coming over from LA to talk to us.
Very welcome.
Andy Puddicombe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.